We usually think major political shifts happen with these big, loud speeches and bold front-page headlines. But what if I told you that the biggest changes to our world are actually happening almost entirely out of view? Today, we're diving deep into some recent intelligence reports and investigative journalism to really uncover the hidden gears of power. We're going to look at how massive institutional shifts don't usually happen through loud declarations, but rather through this quiet, procedural leverage.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp what we're looking at today, we have to examine the gap between those boring bureaucratic rules and their actual real-world impact. Think of this as procedural cover. It's basically the routine leverage, the administrative gears, the technical rules, the endless paperwork that usually just puts people right to sleep, right? But when those gears start turning, they create a substantive outcome. They are quietly shaping massive narratives, driving ideological shifts, and capturing entire institutions literally without anyone ever having to announce their intentions to the public.
To see exactly how this plays out, we're going to hit four main areas today. First, shaping the media landscape. Second, theology and military leadership. Third, following political money trails. And finally, we'll pull back and look at the big picture. All right, starting off with Section 1, shaping the media landscape.
Based on the source documents we're looking at, media regulation is currently the absolute densest area of this behind-the-scenes maneuvering. If we zoom in on the micro level, we can actually trace what analysts are calling the local news extraction playbook, and it happens in three really quiet steps. Step 1 is capital acquisition. You have firms like Alden Global Capital acquiring local newsrooms and systematically stripping their resources. Then, Step 2 is where it gets pretty wild. A startup called Noda came along claiming to fix these news deserts, but reporters actually found it was just using AI to scrape and copy local journalists' work, completely without credit. And finally, Step 3, narrative laundering. With local journalism hollowed out, partisan networks step right in. They use what's literally called pink slime, which is branding that mimics legitimate local news, to quietly launder political narratives directly into those communities.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how this local playbook scales up so aggressively across the mainstream media. Whether it's the FCC using routine station approvals to apply pressure, or tech platforms quietly tweaking their algorithms to reward emotional political rhetoric, this leverage is absolutely everywhere. We're even seeing the BBC accused of using editorial bias to squeeze out the Green Party over in the UK. Meanwhile, massive chains like USA Today are partnering with data giants like Palantir just to monetize how you read, rather than relying on traditional search traffic.
The Atlantic actually summed up this entire concept perfectly. They ran a piece titled, "The Easy Way to Crush the Mainstream Media," and it focused specifically on FCC Chair Brendan Carr. The report lays out exactly how regulatory pressure is being applied without needing any sort of sweeping, formal censorship order. You see, it's not some dramatic censorship decree, it's just the quiet, heavy hand of bureaucracy driving a substantive outcome.
So if you can quietly reshape the information landscape using routine regulatory levers, it begs a really fascinating question. How does this identical structural leverage apply beyond the media? Like, what happens when this mechanism is applied to, say, the United States military?
That brings us to Section 2, theology and military leadership. Recent intelligence reports trace a highly concentrated sphere of influence back to one specific individual, and that's Pastor Doug Wilson. According to CNN, Pete Hegseth invited Wilson to lead a Pentagon prayer service, which marks a broader shift toward explicit Christian symbolism inside federal agencies. On top of that, Mother Jones is reporting that Wilson's patriarchal theology is becoming an apparent ideological template for proposed changes to military command structures. And this actually includes administrative moves to remove women from combat roles. But it doesn't stop at the military. Outside of that, he is also proposing procedural changes to elections, specifically something called a household voting plan that would weight votes by household rather than by individual.
But here is the ultimate twist of unintended consequences. Christianity Today actually ran the math on this household voting plan. And they found that mathematically, weighting votes this way would actually likely shrink the Republican vote share rather than help it. It's a perfect example of how bending the procedural rules for an ideology can just backfire spectacularly.
And lawmakers like Representative Jared Huffman are actively sounding the alarm on this Christian nationalism taking root in Congress. So why does this matter to us? Well, it shows that these quiet, structural changes are beginning to trigger very real battles in the halls of power, battles that will eventually impact everyday legislation and the overall culture of our government.
This brings us to another critical pivot point.
If media narratives and military cultures are being reshaped by this quiet leverage, how is this exact same playbook being used to move vast sums of political money and manage our actual elections?
Let's look at Section 3, Following Political Money Trails.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate gap between PR and reality. On paper, the federal cost-cutting initiative known as Doge publicized a wall of receipts claiming massive financial savings for the government. Now that's the procedural win, but the substantive reality? A formal Government Accountability Office audit reviewed those exact claims and found that the savings figures were flat out incorrect, and the math was entirely unsupported and unverifiable. So the surface-level procedure provided cover for a very different reality.
We're seeing this exact same leverage being pulled at literally every single level of society. Over in Washington, Popular Information notes that major corporations are financially backing a member of Congress despite public domestic abuse allegations. Meanwhile, corporate donors are quietly funding a centrist group called the Third Way, specifically to attack progressive healthcare plans. Down at the border, standard procurement rules are just being waved away to push through construction contracts. And right down to the local level, we're seeing property tax cuts mathematically designed to quietly shift the cost burden onto working families, and a Colorado GOP candidate proposing to delete entire voter rolls based entirely on unverified software. There's no major public debate here. It's just exploiting the structural rules.
And you know, this isn't just an American phenomenon, it's an international playbook of state power. In Brazil, record congressional earmarks procedurally fueled a massive secret budget kickback scheme. Over in Russia, analysts actually flagged Kash Patel's Moscow visit as a potential procedural backchannel for intelligence concessions. And in immigration, the US is utilizing third country removals to send deportees to Equatorial Guinea. The procedural move sounds incredibly technical, but the real-world outcome? Vulnerable people are left in dangerous conditions, allegedly assaulted, and entirely cut off from their legal counsel.
Which leads us to Section 4, the big picture.
So, the crucial point is this. Across every single source document we've analyzed today, the exact same blueprint is being used. Step 1. Avoid loud formal declarations of change. Step 2. Utilize existing bureaucratic procedures and technical leverage. Step 3. Apply quiet regulatory, financial, and administrative pressure. And finally, Step 4. Achieve substantive, systemic ideological shifts completely without triggering massive public backlash. This is the hidden mechanism of modern institutional capture.
I want to leave you all with this final thought. We rely so heavily on headlines and breaking news to tell us when our world is changing. But when our institutions, our media, our military, our elections are reshaped not by a bang, but by a quiet procedural whisper, how long does it actually take for the public to notice the outcome? And by the time we do notice, is it already too late to change it back? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the fine print, and I'll see you next time.